The worst of friends. Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and the true story of an American feud. A feud is a dispute or a quarrel or a disagreement. It's something that is often long lasting. So, this is the true story of an American feud, written by Suzanne Tripp Germain, illustrations by Larry Day. Now, this is a nonfiction narrative, which means it's a true account of something. It's written as a story, and another word for a story is a narrative. So that's why this is called a nonfiction narrative, because it's not a make-believe story, which would be fiction. It is nonfiction, but it's written like a story. Ooh, look at this picture. So here they are, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson. Now, if you didn't know this, John Adams was the vice president to our first president, George Washington, and Thomas Jefferson was the Secretary of State to George Washington. John Adams was also president number 2, and Thomas Jefferson was president number 3. So these are Thomas Jefferson, was also known as the author of the Declaration of Independence. So you can tell by their clothing right here that these are very important people, and it's almost like they're looking toward the future of America. All right, so let's start the story. John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were the best of friends, even though they were completely different. John was fat and Tom was thin. John was tall and Tom was short. Tom was rich and John was not. John was fond of telling jokes. Tom liked to play the violin, and that was only the beginning. So this reminds me a lot of me and my friends that, we don't always have to have everything in common, but we just enjoy each other. Can you think of any friends you might have like that? Excitable John could talk for 5 hours straight without stopping. Quiet Tom sometimes didn't say 3 sentences together in public. They were as different as pickles and ice cream. But that didn't matter because Tom and John were best friends. They walked together, they talked together, and of course, they took care of each other. When Tom caught cold, John's wife Abigail worried about his sneezes. And when John's daughter needed new corsets, Tom ran out and bought her some. Unfortunately, he wasn't sure what size would fit. But best of all, Tom and John had the same big, wonderful ideas about America. And whenever they had a chance to work for their country, they did it together. Back in 1776, when British King George was trying to force the 13 American colonies to obey harsh British laws and pay unfair British taxes, Tom and John got busy. Noisy John, who was one of America's best talkers, told Americans to kick out King George and make America an independent country. Shy Tom, who was one of America's best writers, sat down and wrote the Declaration of Independence to tell King George the colonies were free. And together, Tom and John helped make America a brand new nation. Then, when the new nation needed money to pay its bills and friends to help fight off enemies, Tom and John sailed across the ocean to Europe and talked kings, merchants, and prime ministers into helping America. That was really tough work, but they did it together. And when British King George, who was still pretty mad at the Friends for helping America become independent, rudely turned his back on them during a court ceremony, John Adams and Thomas Jefferson were insulted together. And you can see, look at the way the king has just turned his body and stuck his head up. And ooh, those gentlemen are very upset. So they were always working together to fight the British. And why do you think that was easy for them to do that? I think you're right. It's because they had some of the same ideas. So naturally, you might think that Tom and John would always agree on everything about America, right? Wrong. Around 1790, after they both came back from Europe, something happened. For the first time, Tom and John had really different ideas about their country. And when it came to deciding how to run the brand new United States government, the two best friends just couldn't agree. John said the president should always be the country's biggest, strongest boss, because a really strong and powerful president could defend the country's laws and protect the people's freedoms. Tom said, "No way." He told everybody that a really strong and powerful president might break the country's laws and take away the people's freedom. In fact, said Tom, an extra super strong and bossy president might even try to make himself a king. And this is similar to what's going on in today's country, right? People have different ideas and they start sharing them, and sometimes they get angry. And you can see everybody in the ale house is looking at them and kind of watching it. And look right there in the back, there's where they're taking a tally. And Tom wasn't going to let that happen. So he just had to fight against John's crazy ideas. That upset John. Without a powerful president, John pointed out, the whole brand new United States government might just fall apart. And John wasn't going to let that happen. So he had to fight against Tom's crazy ideas. Now, of course, Tom and John were very polite. They didn't hit each other or shout, but instead of walking out and talking together, they went their separate ways. Ooh, that's always tough when friends have a falling out. Soon, Tom told all the people that he knew John was vain, suspicious, irritable, stubborn, and wrong. And John told all the people he knew that Tom was weak, confused, uninformed, and ignorant. And naturally, people took sides. By 1797, when John was elected to be the second president of the United States and Tom was elected vice president, lots of Americans had different thoughts about how to run the country. One group, the Republican Party, agreed with Tom's ideas. The other, the Federalist Party, agreed with John's. And the parties began to fight. Some Republicans and Federalists actually battled in the streets. Others crossed the road to keep from meeting. Everyone called each other names. The fighting even got so bad that John had to have a special guard posted in front of his house to protect him from crazy people who absolutely hated having John as president. So people get very emotional when other people seem to have a different opinion about what they think is right for them. And that's really important. And so these arguments that we're having today in today's society about what's right and what's wrong with political parties, these have been going on for over 200 years. Poor John. He really wanted to be a good president, but there were so many problems. First, he had to find money to buy more ships for the Navy. Then he had to keep the United States from going to war with France. And on top of that, John had to move into the brand new president's house in the brand new capital city of Washington, D.C. But the paint and plaster in the White House weren't dry yet. And when Abigail hung her wash in one big empty room, it dripped. It's really hard. So in 1800, when Tom and John both ran for president, they tried very hard to beat each other. John urged the Federalists to make speeches, write articles, hold picnics, parade, and barbecues to tell everyone that he would be a very good president. Tom urged the Republicans to make more speeches, write more articles, and hold more picnics, parades, and barbecues to tell everyone he would be an even better president. And when after the election, Tom won, John was not a good loser. Instead of staying in Washington to congratulate Tom at the inauguration, John sneaked out of town on the 4 a.m. stagecoach, 8 hours before his friend was sworn in as President of the United States. So you might be wondering what an inauguration is. The inauguration is a ceremony where the new president, the person who has just been elected, now has a ceremony where he or she takes the oath of office, and that's the promise, and they become the president. After that, John didn't talk to Tom, and Tom didn't talk to John. And you can see he's leaving in the night. John went home to his Massachusetts farmhouse. He built stone walls, he split rails, and sometimes he complained about the way Tom was running the country. Tom went to live in the White House as president. And of course, one of his biggest problems was the Federalists. No matter what Tom said or he did, those Federalists were always there complaining that Tom was a scoundrel who had fricasseed bullfrogs and criticized him for burying the state of Louisiana and a lot of, let me say that again. I'm going to start that over. No matter what Tom said or what he did, those Federalists were always there complaining that Tom was a scoundrel who ate fricasseed bullfrogs and criticizing him for buying the state of Louisiana and a lot of other territory. When something's fricasseed, it's fried in oil. I don't think he really ate bullfrogs. And when Tom, who likes studying science, filled up the White House with 300 dusty old mammoth bones and said that the real live mammoths might actually still live in the American West, the whole Federalist Party said he was doodle-brained and laughed like crazy. Boys and girls, did you know that when we often get a new president, they make additions to the White House? So I know that there used to be a bowling alley, and President Obama took it out and put in a basketball court. I don't know what President Trump did, but I always think that's fun that you get to go do something. So maybe when you're president, you might want to put in something fun. But Tom stayed calm and went on complaining about the Federalists. Finally, after 2 whole terms as president, that's 8 years, Tom retired and went home to his Virginia mansion. His hair turned white, his joints got stiff, but Tom read his 6,707 books. He rode his horse, Old Eagle. He organized snowball fights and running races for his 12 grandchildren. Sometimes he thought about the good old days when he and John had worked for American independence. Sometimes he must have missed his old best friend. And when an acquaintance asked about John Adams, Tom said that John was honest and great. John stayed in his Massachusetts farmhouse. His hands sometimes trembled and his eyesight grew dim. But he read his 3,200 books and wrote nonsense in the margins when he did not agree with the author. He took long walks. He played with Abigail's new puppy, and he served pudding to his 14 grandchildren. Sometimes he thought about the good old days, and sometimes he must have missed talking to his old friend Tom. I always loved Jefferson, Tom said. So see, now that they're older, they've become a little more mellow. I think they really miss each other. Friends like Dr. Benjamin Rush, who signed the Declaration of Independence, along with Tom and John, said, "For goodness sakes, why don't you two make up?" Still, John wouldn't do it. Neither would Tom. But somehow, John must have kept thinking about his old best friend, because on January 1st, 1812, he picked up his pen. "Dear Sir," John wrote, "all of my family are well. I wish you many happy New Years." He signed the letter, then he mailed it to Thomas Jefferson and waited. Would Jefferson write back? 1 month later, the postman brought a letter. John tore open the envelope. The letter was from Tom. John answered right away. After 11 years, there was so much to say, and Tom and John could hardly write letters fast enough. When John's son, John Quincy Adams, was elected as the 6th president of the United States, Tom sent congratulations. When John was feeling silly, he made jokes. Once he signed a letter, J.A. in the 89th year of his age, still too fat to last much longer. And when Tom said they both ought to forget their big fight had ever happened, John was so happy. It was the best letter ever written, he said. After all, John and Tom, after all, John told Tom, you had as good a right to your opinion as I had mine. Yes, Tom said. People could have different ideas and still be friends. So it was all right that sometimes John thought one way and Tom thought another. Little differences didn't matter because Tom and John were best friends. Sick or well, they kept on writing to each other. And when Tom and John both died on the very same day, July 4th, 1826, the 50th birthday of American independence, the whole country was sad, and people all over the United States stopped to remember them. They remembered that Thomas Jefferson and John Adams had been presidents and vice presidents and ambassadors and sometimes bitter enemies. But most of all, people remember that Tom and John were best friends who had helped America grow up together. And there they are. And that is the story of The Worst of Friends. So I hope you guys enjoyed it. And this week, for our nation's election, this is very exciting. This is another exciting time. So I hope you enjoyed the story. And we're going to end it right here.